Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 5th episode in our Critical Creativity in Action webinar series. We're so excited to be here today. My name is Jackie Gardy, and I'll be your host. I work in the Office of English Language Programs as a content development editor and virtual exchange specialist. We also have Chris, Kara, and Brooke behind the scenes helping make this series a success. This series will highlight the exciting new resource called Critical Creativity in Action. Our presenter, Dan Ryder, and I created this resource with support from many teachers around the world. Critical Creativity in Action is a card deck and manual containing literacy strategies designed to help EFL teachers add opportunities for creative and critical thinking in their classrooms. You can find this resource at americanenglish.state.gov/resources/critical creativity action. Please download the print and play version along with the teacher's manual. And if you're watching this from outside the United States, you can contact your regional English language officer or RELO for a physical copy. Throughout these 6 webinars, we'll learn how to incorporate these free materials into our classrooms and engage our students' creative minds. Each session will focus on a different aspect of the Critical Creativity and Action resources, so we encourage you to attend as many of these sessions as possible. You can view recordings on our American English YouTube channel. So what can you expect when you join us for these special webinars? Each webinar will be 60 minutes long. We will focus on one or a few of the activities available in the newest resource for teachers on americanenglish.state.gov called Critical Creativity in Action. We will explore the materials and activities from this resource, and we will share ways to use the resource in the classroom. And we'll finish each episode with thoughts and ideas for adapting materials from Critical Creativity in Action. Please use the comments to share your questions and ideas as we move along today. We want to hear from you. The guiding question for this webinar series is, how might we use creativity to help our learners become critical thinkers? Each episode will help us answer that question in a different way. In today's episode, Scoring Points and Planning Lessons, we will discuss the value of playing games in learning spaces and in our communities, review how the points value on the Critical Creativity and Action cards relate to complexity and time required, practice the game design strategies described in the Critical Creativity and Action Teacher's Manual. So let's begin with this prompt to engage our creativity and get us started today. Think about this question while Dan and I discuss. What are some of our favorite board games, card games, sporting games, social games, and video games? Please type your answer in the comments while I introduce our guest speaker. We are so pleased to have Dan Ryder presenting this series with us today. Dan is the Director of Design and Innovation in the Community Regional Charter School in Skowhegan, Maine, and teaches science, technology, engineering, arts, math, English, and design classes in grades 7 to 12. He has 25 years of classroom teaching experience and works as a consultant in the Office of English Language Programs. He is the writer of Panels and Perspectives, Creating Comics in the EFL Classroom, the co-creator of Critical Creativity in Action card deck, and the co-author of the book Intention, Critical Creativity in the Classroom. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you, Jackie. It's an honor to be here, and I'm excited for us to get started. As Jackie was just saying a few moments ago, during today's webinar, we will discuss the value of playing games and learning spaces in our communities. We will review how the point values on the Critical Creativity in Action cards relate to complexity and the time required to complete them. And we will practice the game design strategies described in the Critical Creativity in Action Teacher's Manual. These icons here are to help us visualize the ideas that we're exploring. The brain icon indicates points in the webinar series when we will deliver new knowledge, definitions, or terms. We use the notepad icon to indicate points in this webinar series when we will provide examples of critical creativity and these skills in action. And finally, We use the pencil icon to indicate points in the webinar series when participants will be practicing the skills we discuss by creating and making.
And also during our time together today, keep an eye out on the slides for the campfire icon. The campfire icon is a signal that we will be responding to questions together. Participate by commenting and contributing to other comments as well. Campfires are used in cultures all around the world for people to share stories, information, insight, and ideas. People gather around campfires to ask questions, create solutions, and make plans. So we will use the campfire icon as our signal today for responding to prompts.
So let's get back to our first campfire question. What are some of our favorite board games? What are some of the games we play with learners in our learning spaces? And also let's talk about what are some of our board games, card games, sporting games, social games, and or video games that we like to play. Jackie, what are some of your favorites?
Well, I like to play Dungeons and Dragons, definitely. It's one of my favorite games. I love the storytelling aspect of the game. And I also like learning languages through gamified apps. On a certain game, I've been in their Diamond League for 54 weeks now, and I currently have a 445-day streak.
Wow, that is impressive. Are you learning a language?
Yes, I'm relearning French. I learned it as a child, but I never really picked it up all the way. So I'm relearning it now as an adult, and I just got to the B1 level last week. The gamified aspect of the app keeps me super motivated.
That's really impressive. So some of my favorite games to play are board games like Alhambra and Ticket to Ride, as well as fast-paced card games like Sushi Go and Dominion. I also play a lot of card games too, but my favorite game to play right now is also Dungeons and Dragons because I love creating the characters and creating stories for others to play through. But what you were just saying about the gamified aspect of those apps, that motivation is one of the reasons why gamification is so popular in classrooms. Learners see the next level and what it takes to get there, and it very often helps push them to reach the next goal.
So I think before we begin, Dan, could you give us a refresher on what you mean by critical creativity?
I sure can. That is a fantastic idea. So everyone knows exactly where we're coming from in this webinar. So critical creativity happens when we combine creative expression with critical thinking to develop deeper understanding and mastery of skills, concepts, and knowledge. When we look at the relationship between games and critical creativity, we can see that games are opportunities for learners to use creative problem solving, to use higher order thinking skills, and to create gameplay experiences that showcase their language skills. In the classroom, critical creativity can take on a lot of different looks. These are 3 examples that all come from my own classroom and my learners, and actually one of them includes a game that we were designing. So we build circuits and explain cultural values in the United States and around the world. We also design games that help us work on our English conversational skills and our conversational skills in general. And we draw illustrations to practice our English vocabulary skills. And that's what you see there on the right image. But of course, there are many other forms of creative expression besides these. But what really matters is being intentional in how we use creativity to help learners develop their critical thinking skills, especially as they are learning English language skills. So another way to think about critical creativity is that critical creativity allows students to build authentic literacy skills while exercising their imaginations and creative spirits. In this image here, you can see where a learner designed, drew, and diagrammed an original creature that would thrive in our local climate. And this was actually done as part of a game about our local environment and designing characters and creatures that we could capture and place into our collections in our communities. If you look carefully, you can see how they're diagrammed with different parts of the body. There's a white muzzle so they can hide in the snow, and there's a tail to keep them balanced through our trees, and then there's a rainbow wing pattern to help them disguise as they fly. Right, so all of this, though, and in this example and the others, they all start with learning to read, write, listen, and speak.
I love that idea that we're incorporating language skills into our games. So let's think about the experience of teaching in a playful or gamified way. When should we play games in our learning spaces? Put your responses in the comments as you watch this. So Dan, what do you think, when do you think that we should play games in our learning spaces? When do you?
Well, I tend to do it fairly often. When I was thinking about this, I thought that some people might try to come up with like a pattern or a plan, right? Like once a year or once a month, once a week or once a day. I find once a year too infrequently because I don't think it allows us to benefit from using them. And I find once a day, sometimes it can feel like we're not able to balance between our more traditional academic learning and our gameplay. So what I shoot for in my work is once a week. I try to have a gameplay experience or a game design experience at least once a week so that we can benefit from all these great game-based thinking ideas and this game-based learning. What about you? What would you recommend to participants watching this?
Well, I've been thinking about this too, and I think it really depends on the level of English that your students might have. So when I was teaching literacy to adults, I often incorporated games and gamified lessons into it because it gave my students something to do, and instead of focusing on the language they didn't have, it was focusing on the language that they did have. And I used a lot of imagery as well in those games. So it was a lot of moving up and down in the classroom, gesturing, and having my students go from one room to the other side of the room, like with binary voting and those kind of things. And with my ESOL students in high school, when I taught high school, it was the same thing. Like I would say with the high school, because the curriculum was so like regimented, I was only really able to incorporate games and gamified approaches to learning about once a week. But I did try to do it as much as I could because it kept the students really engaged.
And what I'm hoping today does for our participants and watching this video, they're able to see opportunities when they could work some of those games in, just like what you were saying there about balancing out with doing it more frequently with younger learners and then with the older learners, realizing, oh, I can't do it as much as I would like, and we're missing out on opportunities if we just stick with the very rigid traditions.
Right. So I think this is great. I'm hoping that today's lesson will help you all feel more confident and comfortable using critical creativity and action deck as a game and using gamified approaches to these cards. So Dan, maybe we could start by talking about the value of playing games in our classrooms and our learning communities. We've touched a little bit about this, but let's delve in deeper.
Right. We've talked a lot about motivation, but there's also beyond motivation, there's one really big reason to use games in our classrooms. So we're going to discuss that value here. And the big reason is games are everywhere in our lives. Our learners play football, basketball, and other sports. Our learners play card games and mobile phone games. Our learners play board games with their families and their friends. And those games are almost always full of laughter and joy and a great deal of thinking.
Now, I see all these games here that you show on the screen, but what about the games I would call like mindless, like the match 3 games on my phone that I play while I'm waiting for the train or I'm waiting in line somewhere? They suck up a lot of time, but I don't think that they're really valuable educationally. What do you think?
Oh, see, I would disagree. I actually think there's a lot going on with those games. Now, they can suck up a lot of time and they can draw your attention. So you have to make sure you balance that with the other things you need to do, like getting on the right bus or making sure you're not holding up the line at a grocery store. But most of those really mindless games are actually challenging us because they're challenging us to apply patterns, identify patterns, see systems, and we have to do it quickly. And we got to use higher order thinking skills, even when it seems like it's too fast or it's too simple to be useful. Even knocking down cookies or collecting gems or making little patterns of colors, all of it is digging into like a deeper place inside of our brains. So they're not really that mindless at all. Because games ask us to think about solving problems and achieving goals in 5 distinct ways. And together, I put these together into something I call game-based thinking and learning. Because games ask us to think about trials and errors and stories and quests, rules and guidelines, choices and consequences, and mechanics and systems. This is really important to English language learning because these 5 components of game-based thinking are very much aligned to the skills and components of English language learning. Now, over these next 5 slides, we're going to explain how, and we're going to look at the classic game of chess to help us see examples of these concepts in action. So let's start with trials and errors. Every game requires a degree of calculated risk-taking, looking at the situation and determining the risks and the rewards involved. In order to improve at any game, players must learn from their mistakes. Many video games feature players making mistakes over and over again until they're able to defeat an obstacle by figuring out the pattern. Now, Jackie, what's that like in chess?
Yeah, so in chess, trials and errors are important to testing and understanding an opponent's reactions and strategies. So we might move a pawn into position to see if the opponent will capture it right away or leave it on the board to set up a future move. Trials and errors also make it possible for us to remember failed strategies from prior games of chess. This thinking helps us recognize similar patterns in our current games and recall what worked before and what didn't work. And that is how we get better and better at the games, which I think actually applies a lot to language learning and making mistakes. What do you think?
Absolutely, because this is similar when we're trying to learn a new language skill that is outside of our comfort zones. So that might be like performing a dialogue in front of an unfamiliar audience or writing using new vocabulary. That's all trial and error thinking. We have to have those experiences in order to learn from them. It also takes place when we receive feedback on a piece of writing or when we're practicing applying that vocabulary. Every time we apply feedback to a new attempt at learning, we're learning in terms of trial and error. Now, the next component of game-based thinking that I want us to talk about is stories and quests. All games encourage us to develop our story sense with the sense of beginning, middle, and end organization. As players, we're presented with challenging goals and obstacles to overcome. In chess, that happens too, Jackie.
Yeah, I can see that because I think like in chess, the story of conflict between 2 players starts with opening moves and finishes with an end game. So throughout the game, there are problems each player must solve with the overall goal of checkmate always in mind.
Exactly. And in the English language classroom, stories and quests take the shapes of goal setting and then monitoring progress towards those goals, right? The story sense we use when playing games can also help us with reading comprehension and understanding the plot of a written story, because every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like every game has an opening, a middle, and a closing.
Absolutely. It seems like we could use the characters and stories learners encounter in video games to help them with reading and listening skills as well. What do you think?
Oh, that's a really good idea because there's often a ton of dialogue in video games. And it's an opportunity for them to practice what they're hearing and seeing. And also, just a quick little note, many video games allow you to change the language on them. So you could change the language to English to see what the translations are if you're playing a game that's in your native language, and vice versa. So it can be a really helpful way to practice learning language skills in many, many games. Now, oh, go ahead, Jackie. What were you going to say?
I think that's great. I think that's a really important point, is that there actually are quite a lot of language supports within video games themselves, especially with the language building and acquisition.
Absolutely. And as we progress more and more with other media, we're finding almost closed captioning. It's showing up in some video games that we play. So there's also rules and guidelines in all of these games. Every game has that set of rules that everyone must follow. Otherwise, we're just participating in an activity and a playful experience. We're not participating in a game.
Right. So back to chess, each piece has a specific set of moves and actions that it may take. Some are simple, like the bishop moving in a horizontal direction. Others are more complicated, like pawns who may move a different number of squares depending on the circumstances and may only attack horizontally. There are also many guidelines to follow depending on how serious or competitive the match is.
Exactly. Like, I don't know if you've had this experience, but where you've played with a player who is taking it very seriously and you realize you have to follow exact rules of chess, or when you're playing with maybe your son, or I'm playing with my son and it's more of a casual learning how to play, or maybe it's friends while you're talking about something else. You're not really paying careful attention to every single rule, or when you touch a piece, or how long you can take before the next move. Have you had that experience?
Yes, all the time.
Right. So I think it's important to point out that circumstances and situations dictate how seriously the rules are to be followed. And this is just like in English language learning. When we look at the rules of the English language, we're talking about grammar rules, parts of speech, proper sentence structure. And we learn that there are situations where more casual language may be used. And then there are situations when formal language is absolutely necessary.
Right. So we can definitely think of learning a language as a game in all these different ways. So, and we can think about using rubrics and checklists as guidelines for meeting expectations on assessments. So the rubrics and checklists provide the criteria for achieving the highest score in achievement. The learners must work within the rules to achieve those levels. So again, the game of learning.
Absolutely. And doing all of that requires learners to think about choices and consequences. Games require us to think about cause and effect. If we do this, what will happen? Right? Each of the choices we make has consequences. Some are positive, some are negative, and some are neutral.
Yes. And in chess, this looks like deciding to open the game with a pawn or a knight. It may not seem like an important decision at first. However, the consequences of that first decision could impact the entire game from that moment forward. This is also the thinking that we use when deciding to take an opponent's piece or using one of our pieces as a sacrifice to set a trap.
Absolutely. I don't know how many times I've been in a game of chess. I'm sure you have been too, where you sit there and wonder, if I do this move now, what is that going to mean 2 or 3 moves later? Have you had that experience?
Yes, I have.
So in English language learning, we also have to make effective word choices and find just the right vocab word for the situation. We can experience the negative impact of choosing an improper tone of voice in a particular situation. So it's important that we understand that our language habits and our language choices can have long-term effects on our experiences.
That's a good reminder that even though games are meant to be fun, the consequences of the choices made during a game can be quite serious. This is true as we are learning English language skills and understand the impact of our words and interpretations may have on others.
So in any game, there are specific processes we all have to follow. We have to apply those mechanics and systems to lead to logical and predictable outcomes. That makes it possible to strategize and plan for success. We know what is coming when it comes to a game.
Right. So in a game of chess, we see mechanics and systems become important when a pawn reaches the other side of the board and may be traded for another piece. The systems and mechanics are what make it possible for some chess players to carry out a game just by writing down their moves. Because players know the system, they can play the game without a board or pieces.
I remember growing up and seeing my grandfather read the chess column in the newspaper. And there weren't any pieces, it was just lists of moves. But he knew the code, he understood how the system worked. And when he looked at the diagrams, he knew exactly what that meant for the play. And he'd write down his moves and give them to a friend of his on a piece of paper, and they would trade moves at work, which I thought was a really interesting approach. And I just
Definitely.
thought that while you were saying that.
Huh.
So English language systems, in English language learning rather, there are mechanics and systems that appear during the writing and revision process, as well as any situation where punctuation has to be correct. We're able to understand one another and correct one another's mistakes because there's a clear set of mechanics for placing punctuation and for constructing sentences. How well our writing is understood and our messages received depends entirely upon how well we use those mechanics and how well we use the systems that are there to help us.
It's really interesting to see how game-based thinking connects so well to traditional English language learning concepts. So let's think about these connections some more as we answer the next campfire question. So campfire question 3 asks us, how do we benefit from playing games with our learners? Type your responses in the comments so we can all learn together today as you're watching.
So Jackie, when you were playing games with your learners in the classroom that you taught in, what were some of the benefits that you immediately saw for your learners?
I definitely saw confidence, like a building of confidence as the students got more comfortable working with each other. And games are unique in that way that you're collaborating and working with your classmates, but it's not in scripted ways. So the dialogue that you have with with the fellow players is definitely more natural. And I generally tried to, so I taught in classrooms where there were multiple first languages. So it was pretty easy for me to divide out my students into groups where nobody had the same common first language. Now, I know that that's not always possible in many parts of the world where there's only one native language amongst all of your students. But if you can get a chance to separate out your students with different native languages, that actually kind of forces them to speak in the one common language, which is our target language, English. And
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
So the students just become better communicators with each other. And as they get more comfortable with each other, they're more apt to put forth more, like an experiment with more language.
100% agree. And with what I've noticed is that playing games is a great opportunity for the educator to step back a little bit and for the teacher to just watch what happens. And you can learn a lot from observing gameplay and listening to what learners are saying and how they're interacting with each other. in a way that you can't always get when they're simply practicing a dialogue. Right? It's important to practice those dialogues, but there's something about seeing them in a gameplay experience that changes how they feel and think about their language that they're using. There's also
Absolutely.
said for just like shared laughter, right? Just
Yes.
having a joyful experience together can do a lot, like you were saying about bringing a sense of community to the classroom.
Absolutely. And I think that games can be incredibly motivating for learners by engaging their competitive or problem-solving interests. So, like, I just think of like the phone game that I use to learn language. I'm very motivated by that competition aspect. Like, I really want to be in the top league of that app every single week, and I work really hard to stay on top of it. Doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. No, not at all. Nobody is going to give me bonus points for being top of some language learning app, but it keeps me motivated and engaged. And I think that the more that we incorporate those kinds of motivations into our classroom, like by having classroom leaderboards on your board, by just adding competitiveness when it's appropriate and possible, can really motivate some students.
Absolutely. And at the same time, I am not very competitive when it comes to those situations. So I look for opportunities to have those leaderboards and opportunities to have problems like collaborative problem solving opportunities. Those are my favorite types of games when they're cooperative and it's everyone working together to solve it. We talked about Dungeons and Dragons earlier, and it's one of the things I love about that game is it requires teamwork and it requires everybody coming together. So there are so many ways that games can be of benefit. And I think what I also like is that everything we just said it's true. It's not that one response is the right response and one benefit is better than others. They're all fantastic.
Yes. And I think something that's important here is that it's okay to make mistakes and learn from them, and that's part of playing a game. And we can definitely apply that to language learning as well. Like, it takes a lot of time and a lot of mistakes to learn a language. And even if you're working on your native language, you can make mistakes all the time. I do all the time. Language learning and language using is a tricky thing. So the more that we allow environments where our students can experiment with low or no consequences with using the target language, I think the better it is for everyone. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. And that's part of why we created the critical creativity and action deck, because those activities are low risk, but high reward, high fun, very open opportunities for us to make mistakes while also being in a really positive, meaningful environment, right?
Awesome. So I think that now would be a great time to show our participants how the point values on the critical creativity and action cards work. What do you think?
Absolutely. Let's take a quick moment to review all the features on the critical creativity and action cards, especially for people for whom this might be their first video or webinar with us, and they might not have seen these yet. So let's take a look here. So I've bulleted all the elements on these cards. At the top of each card, you're going to find a number because we have 48, and you're going to easily know which card you're looking at. There's an activity name. In this case, it's song catching. There are some discussion questions that you can ask students after the activity. There are some directions on how to complete the activity. There are icons, and the icons relate to the English language skills that are being used and to the thinking knowledge that's being developed in that activity. Now we have a teacher's manual that has explanations of all of these icons, explanations of every activity, as well as this whole series of webinars that you can go back and review and can tune in for our next one as well. But there is a lot of information on these cards. Today, we're focusing on the point values. But the point values indicate the relative complexity and time needed for the activity. So a 1-point card is a lower complexity activity, and you can expect that to take 30 minutes or less. A 2-point card has an average complexity and will take 30 to 45 minutes to complete. And a 3-point card activity will be of a higher complexity and will likely take 45 minutes or maybe even longer to complete.
So now that we know about the point values and the other features of the cards, let's practice the game design strategies described in the Critical Creativity and Action Teacher's Manual. Now, Dan, I think you have some formats to share and maybe even some demonstrations for us.
You're right. And I plan to show some of those formats, and then I'm going to tip my camera down and you're going to see me play with some of the cards to show a few other ways that we can use them and what these cards will look like in action. So there's 3 basic ways to play these cards as a game. We can focus on the point values, we could focus on the card numbers, or we could focus on competition and collaboration. So if we think about how many points there are on each card, one way we could arrange them is to create what we call a 10-point week. You lay out a series of cards that total 10 points worth of activities. Then over the space of a week of instruction, you complete each of those activities. This can provide a balance of variety and depth. One of the reasons we choose 10 points is because that requires participants to choose both more complex and less complex activities from the deck. Here's a more complex system called the compass. And what we do with the compass is we set 3 stacks of cards in each of the 3 cardinal points of a compass: north, south, east, and west.
So can you explain to the participants what's going on with these cards?
Okay, yes, absolutely. So what we do is a learner will choose, oh, I want to take the east stack. And they'll take the east stack, and then they will choose one of the 3 activities from that stack. The idea here is it's giving learners an opportunity to make a deliberate and intentional choice about the direction in which their learning is going to take place. So as you can see here, that east stack had binary voting, 1 word to rule them all, and letter detective. So the learners would choose which of those activities they want to participate in.
I think that you make an important point here. So part of critical thinking is evaluating decisions based on criteria and learners taking a more active role in choosing the paths of their learning. And the point values aren't the only way to organize the game-based activities, right? So can you show us at least one of the other organizational inspirations that you have?
Absolutely. This one is community meeting, and it's based on the idea of activities and experiences one would find at a community meeting where people are coming together to discuss issues in the community or working together to solve a problem. So this set is 2 images, 1 question, 5 by 5 ideas, binary voting, and think like a. And each of those asks learners to brainstorm ideas. One of them asks them to make choices between 2 options, just like you would do in a meeting with people where you're problem solving. One asks you to think in a way that's different from others and practice some empathy work. And the other asks you to take images or evidence and think about what question does that cause us to want to ask. So in this particular set of 4 cards, 36, 39, 46, and 48, it allows us to almost simulate the experience of being in a community meeting. It's a thematic collection. There's another one too, is bookstore. All 4 of these activities are around literary themes and ideas and things that you would find going into any bookstore. So we have human magnetic poetry, we have words and remixes, book cover makeover, and then same ingredients, different dish. So in each of those, learners would be participating in ways that allow them to create story, to think about how to illustrate stories, to play around with language, or to think about genres and style. So what do you think, Jackie? Should I show the last ways that we can use these cards using some of the actual critical creativity and action cards?
Yes, absolutely. Let's do it.
So it's going to take me one moment because I'm going to turn off my background here. It's going to be a little ugly for just a second. I'm going to turn off my background. And hopefully everyone can see this just fine. Can you see this okay, Jackie?
Yep, looks great.
All right, so here's a deck of cards. This is what it looks like when you receive them. Open them up. You can get these by contacting your local Relo and asking them for a set of these cards, but you can also print and play them. We have Jackie formatted an entire system of these through a print and play so that anyone can download them and use them anywhere around the world. So here are the cards, and what you would do is I'm going to just shuffle them up quickly so we get some variety. You might start by breaking them into two decks. There's also a reference card here that helps you understand how to use them. And if I shuffle these quickly, you might have two learners sitting across from each other. And you might start with something like this, where they take the two decks of cards and one draws from the bottom so you don't see what's coming. And one says, okay, I think we should do cut up creativity. And the other says, places out three of me. And then they have to choose which of these two activities that they're going to participate in. So it allows for some random play and some random decisions, right? So then we could also do something where we lay out cards and we look at their point value side, right? There's some glare there, makes it a little hard. And we might say, you're going to get 5 cards. We deal out 5 cards to each player. 2, 3, 4. Oh, let's get some variety in there. I didn't shuffle these super well. And then we say, all right, you've got 5 cards. You've got 5 cards. In the next 15 minutes, you need to complete as many points worth of activities as you can. Of course, this requires that you have some experience with these activities, right? But you might start with a Magifor. That's a 1-point activity. And they put that one down. And this other learner says, all right, I'm going to go for this 2-point activity. And I'm going to do this in 15 minutes and see if I can complete this activity. And then the other player says, oh, I really want to do something really challenging. I'm going to try to do this 3-point activity quickly and see if I can do it and earn those 3 points by completing this experience. While the other player says, oh, now I'm going to try to be competitive, just like Jackie was in her leaderboards there. And I'm going to try to do a book cover makeover. So while this building a bridge activity is going on and this cut up creativity activity is happening, these learners are trying their best to earn as many points as they can playing out these activities. And those are just a couple of different formats that you could use. I'm going to turn on my background here. Can't see my workspace here quite so well. There we go. But those are just a couple of activities that you might be able to use with your learners, and using these decks as an opportunity to, and these cards as opportunities to play out competitive forms of games or collaborative forms of games, and use those point values to help drive motivation, but also to help you make decisions about what would work well and what wouldn't work well for the circumstances that you're in.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that demo with us. I think it really brings them alive to see how they look and feel in real life. And all these formats seem like they could be great for engagement as well as adding voice and choice to our classrooms. So let's consider this last campfire question. What are some structures and experiences in your communities that could inspire a format for a creativity card game?
So I
If you can
came up.
see,
Oh,
yep,
go
go for
ahead.
it, Dan. Please.
Well, I was just going to say these are four things, categories that I tend to see in our neighborhoods, right? We can think about sports, we can think about daily routines, we can think about social groupings, we can think about traditional events that happen. So one I was thinking about is a soccer match, right? Where you could take 11 of these cards. Oh, there you go. Take 11 of these cards and lay them out as you would on a soccer pitch with a goalie, two defensive backs, your midfielders, your striker, your wings. And then you could have learners complete activities by starting at the back, then choosing one from the back line, then choosing one from the midfield, and then choosing one from the front line as a way to structure. And they could have to complete those activities to move the ball forward, so to speak.
Yeah, that sounds cool. And I think that that's something that our students could easily relate to, like soccer or what the world calls football is like,
I said soccer, didn't I?
yeah,
I meant to say football.
it's okay. Um, we call them different things in different places. So, but I think that because it's such a worldwide phenomenon, our students will really relate to playing anything that's similar to football or soccer.
You could also, I was just thinking you could also do something with basketball. That's one that we call the same around the world, but you could do something similar with 5 cards, and moving the ball and passing the ball takes the form of, all right, I'm going to start with this card, and this card needs to get to this card. So we have to do this activity and then this activity, and that will allow us to move that ball and pass the ball. We could also play defense by the other player could say, oh, wait, I'm going to play this card down. We're going to do this activity, and that's going to allow me to stop the ball from moving down the court.
I like that. And I think that that gives our students so much choice in their learning. What are some other strategies that are similar to what happens in our communities?
Well, another one I was thinking about was like a neighborhood block party. So what if we had, because communities get together to socialize and to dance, to have music, to have fun, right? So what if we laid out 4 sets of cards in 4 grids, and then learners circulated through all 4 grids until, just like you go from conversation to conversation or activity to activity in a party, in a gathering. And then until they have completed all 4 of those activities in each one of the grids. So I thought the idea of showing a neighborhood and people moving through different spaces and different activities would be another way that you could use a structure or a format that you encounter every day.
That's cool. And I think that I love all these strategies. I love how we're looking at this. And we should also let our teachers know here that the teacher's manual has all of these things in detail that you can use, that you can look through and read and learn from before you ever do this in the classroom. So if you're feeling a little intimidated by all the different ways that you can use them, make sure to check that teacher's manual, because it will provide you a lot of detail on how to approach these cards and the gamified approaches to learning in your classroom.
Absolutely. So we're really hopeful you enjoyed this recording today. Today we discussed the value of playing games and learning spaces in our communities. We reviewed how the point values on the critical creativity and action cards relate to the complexity and the time required to complete those games. We practice the game design strategies that are described in the Critical Creativity and Action Teacher's Manual. And I just really appreciate everyone who watched, participated, the comments that I'm sure we're going to see under this video. And just thank you all for letting me be part of your learning journey. And a big thanks to everyone behind the scenes who make this possible, including Chris, Kara, Lindsay, Melissa, and especially you, Jackie, for being such a great co-collaborator in this experience.
Well, thank you, Dan. We always love having you here on American English for Educators. Please add your comments and questions, and we will be sure to respond. And remember to check back on this recording and keep asking your questions. So as a reminder, this is the 5th episode in our webinar series for Critical Creativity in Action. Our next webinar is going to be on December 5th, and we hope to see all of you there and your colleagues. Here's the schedule of all that have happened, and all the recordings, as a reminder, are on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check out our YouTube channel to see any ones that you missed or ones that you want to see again. And be sure to visit americanenglish.state.gov and download the Critical Creativity and Action cards and manual. This is as a reminder, this is our newest publication. It's a card deck and manual containing all the literacy strategies you just learned about. It's designed to help EFL teachers add opportunities for creative and critical thinking in their classrooms. And it has print and play, which means that you can just print the cards on your own printer. 50 card deck of activities for the classroom. There's a downloadable teacher's manual that you can download and look at any time. And then there's also a slide deck that you can use if you have access to technology and want to share the slides while you're teaching. It's all available for free on americanenglish.state.gov. And if you want physical copies of the cards, please reach out to your Relo and request them. So many of the ideas found in Critical Creativity in Action are from Dan's book that he co-wrote with Amy Burville, Intention, Critical Creativity in the Classroom. Amy was instrumental in leading the worldwide pilots and creating the preliminary design prototypes for Critical Creativity in Action so that all these activities would work in a worldwide environment. And our next webinar is going to be on December 5th. We really hope to see you there soon. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone.